Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the center. Welcome to First Center for Spiritual Living here in New York City. I'm thrilled to see we've got more people here in person. That's always wonderful. We're planning a party in another week or two. It's June 12th, correct? That's our kind of like get to bring you back party. So those of you who are in New York, please come. We'll have some food. I have no idea if there'll be a few or many, but it'll be a good time, no matter however many. So I've got an interesting talk today. It's a subject I don't usually talk about much, but we'll see. In the talk, they deal with the subject of evil. I'll give you I'm basically saying what I'm going to be talking about in advance. And I'm also going to head it off by saying we don't really believe in a power for evil, but I'll explain it from a religious science standpoint, how we handle the subject. So I want to welcome everybody on the Zoom call. I'm looking at all the names. I recognize many. And we're really thrilled that you're here with us. And if you happen to be watching this later in the week, as many of you do, last week we had something like 56 people on Thursday, vary between 52, 56, and Sunday mornings we're getting a large crowd too, so that's great. And a number of you watch on, Facebook. All of our broadcasts eventually go to Facebook, probably after a couple hours. The same for YouTube. For those of you who are watching us, please send us your information, and then we can invite you into the Zoom call, which is, I think, more special because everyone has an opportunity, if you want to share after every one of our gatherings. Please don't ever feel obliged. We go around and we mention your name, and you can say, hi, I'm from wherever you're from, and whatever you'd like to share, or you can pass if some of you are watching from work. Our classes, for the most part, are all free, and of course, and we love it when you send us love offerings. And all of the social media pages have links where you could donate through PayPal or through various credit cards. And some of you, like myself, maybe might prefer to send a check, and we certainly welcome it. It helps us. We have a lot of expenses here in New York to keep these programs going. But the main thing is we want to know that, we want you to know you can invite your friends. There's never going to be any formal charge. So we are here to serve you and to bring our messages, our healing message forward. And somehow, in some way, we know that we're supplied and supported. And so it is. Let me see, any other announcements? This, by the way, we call ourselves the First Center for Spiritual Living. We are, in fact, legally the first church of religious science in New York. We've been here since 1949, and we've been providing uplifting messages weekly ever since. I think it was the fall of 1949. Our center was started by the great Reverend Raymond Charles Barker. He wrote a few books. The one that's most well known was called The Power of Decision. It's still in print. It's still a book that we highly recommend. And there's a lot of other books I could recommend to you if you're new that might be easier than our textbook. I wanted to mention that today. Ernest Holmes wrote other books as well. And I want to mention at least one time that we meet also, if Sunday's not convenient, if you're listening on Facebook or YouTube, we meet every Thursday at 7 p.m. So you can join us on Zoom. And that class is based upon the teachings of Ernest Holmes, but it's delivered largely through this book, which is entitled You Can Heal Your Life. It's our pleasure to present that material every Thursday. We've been doing it for years. I've been doing it for decades. And we call that class the Hay and Holmes class. And if you don't know either of them, I don't know where you've been, but if you don't know either of them, I'll simply say, if you're a younger person, the Thursday class is about us reminding you of how beautiful and wonderful you are, in fact, in truth. We will use some words you might not understand, but we try to break it down so you will understand. But the point behind the point is everybody is a spiritual being, and our classes and our gatherings are really here to remind you of the power that you possess and the truth of who you are. Many people think Ernest Holmes was a genius because he brought all of the best of the knowledge that was available at the time, and that would be philosophy, religions, East and West, and what we now call New Thought. He brought it all together, and he made it accessible for his time. He was, a lot of my older friends, ministers, thought of him as a genius, and his work was written mostly, at least the text, in 1926. And on one hand, it was a great success because it brought a lot of ideas together and forward so that people would be able to see life in a new way. But still, it was a textbook, and it wouldn't be fun reading for most people. It was a tremendous gift, nonetheless, and people like us have been studying this book for, well, most of my adult life, and Reverend Judith is with us too, and I'm pretty sure that would be true for her as well. Most ministers I know have claimed to at least read the book through once or twice. I think I've done it twice or maybe 3 times. And all of us refer to it all the time in our talks, in our, it's one of those books you just pull off the shelf and you always go back to. And it also comes with, or you can purchase a concordance. And what that is, if you don't know, is a book where you can search ideas and phrases into the textbook. When I started out studying the science of mind, my first teacher sent me directly to the glossary, where I would learn what an affirmative prayer was, what a treatment was, and what's the difference between a treatment and an affirmation, for example. And the glossary will say that, well, to do a treatment or to do an affirmation, there's 2 definitions, but the one that I always like the best is it's the time, it's the art, it's the method of ridding this negativity or this negation from my consciousness so that I can perceive the beauty and the truth around me. So Dr. Holmes, aside from the textbook, which we've all been using for the past generation, wrote other books that might be more accessible for most people. But now I want to emphasize that that book was written in 1926. And so 50 years later, Louise Hay, one of our students right here in New York at this very center, First Church, Louise became a practitioner here under these great people who started this place, and this would be Barker and Dr. Grayson. And she wrote the book, You Can Heal Your Life, which I just, I'll show it to you again. And this book is sold, they say 66 million copies, and it's been read by over 100 million. I know The Science of Mind was printed 39 times, but I'm quite sure it never had the same reach that Louise Hay did. But the Science of Mind textbook is still very much in circulation, and people often buy it along with a concordance, as I said. All of the words that Ernest Holmes expressed, had been taught with that book all over the country. And these centers were thriving for many, many years because people were wanting to understand New Thought. And many were moving away from the more traditional faiths that they were questioning, the idea of sin and punishment and damnation, all of that. So people are trending toward New Thought. Louise Hay, again, was a student here in New York. She was taking the same classes that are part of our curriculum, and she became a practitioner here. I believe, like people thought Ernest Holmes was a spiritual genius of his time. I believe Louise Hay was a spiritual genius of her time because she codified she brought together some of the best ideas that Ernest Holmes taught. And my goodness, her book circulated the globe and was translated into 28 languages. She was always teaching the science of mind, though. The thing about it is she was teaching it in a way that everybody could understand it. You didn't need a concordance to understand what she was talking about. She was teaching what all the ministers were teaching from coast to coast, but she found the way, or a way to language it so she could speak to an entire generation, where she could in fact reach, upwards close to 100 million people, perhaps more. It wouldn't matter if she was addressing an older group in a senior center, which she had done. It wouldn't matter if she were addressing a women's group or a church, or it just didn't matter. Her message was clear, and so she communicated so well. And she struck a nerve because she'll say the bottom line for everybody that I've ever worked with, after I hear all their reasons, on some level, there's something missing, there's something wrong, or I don't feel what? I don't feel good enough about myself. So again, it wouldn't matter if you were an older person, if you had a health situation challenge, or you were a teenager, or someone who was going through any life challenge. She would open many of her sessions with that simple line, which you've all heard before. She would say, it's all very simple. What you give out comes back to you. And I really understood from her work that my consciousness is everything. Now, you might not understand that if you're new to the call, and please bear with us because we'll talk about consciousness endlessly, if not today, throughout the coming weeks. She said, it's all very simple. What I give out to you comes back to you. So that's really the story of consciousness. My consciousness, your consciousness is everything. If I want to have anything in my outer world change, then what has to change first? It has to be my inner world, or what we call our consciousness, right? Every Thursday night, again, at 7 o'clock here, we will work with numerous themes from her self-healing book. And we will be working with Ernest Holmes material as well, because to me, it's one and the same. Thursday night's experience is here on Zoom and in person now, so please come and visit us. It's a time where we can gather and reflect, a time where we can remember the truth of our being. Now, what the heck do I mean about that? The truth of my being. Well, I might walk around with a cloud over my head and feel that I'm disadvantaged and woe is me and ain't it awful, right? And I might be nurturing some kind of story that I'm defective or broken, and this is what people do. But when we gather every week here on Sundays or on Thursdays, it's a time where we can remember or be reminded of the truth of our being, that we are whole, complete, beautiful, wondrous creatures of God. We are individualizations of spirit. And we will remind you how great you are. And you don't get that everywhere, and this is free, so it's a good thing if you can get all that and you don't have to pay anything for it. But we do accept donations, right? So as you come into a new thought center, you hear phrases like the truth of my being. And as you do, you're being introduced to the idea that you are an aspect of the divine. When people think of the truth of their being, they come to the conclusion that they're more than just this body of so many years. You're coming to the teaching. When you come to a teaching like this, you learn and you're reminded that you are an aspect, a part, if you will, of God, or what we call an individualization of this spirit. Many of us have had a lot of messaging about God in our lives. I know I've had a ton of messaging. I've studied since world religions, And I know a little bit about a lot of them and the different messages and the themes. Let me say, this teaching that we have here is a universal teaching. Most everyone finds it appealing. Not everybody, but most everyone. Because we're here lifting people up. We're here reminding people of how wonderful they are, and we are reminding you also that the people around you, even when they're acting badly, still are spiritual beings. So we are learning to love everybody as we find them, and we know everybody's evolving. We're all evoluting along. So we're not here to judge anybody, certainly. We're really here always to do our work, which is in mind and which is in consciousness. So we start with this very simple premise. And we talk about this thing. Ernest Holmes referred to it as it in the textbook. And the thing, right? The thing itself, what it does, how it works. What's the other one? How we use it. What it is. So the first time I heard them talking about God using the word it, I wanted to bless myself because I thought, oh my goodness. So we start out with this very simple premise that whatever you want to call it and whatever it is, and we know there's many names for this presence, and through history and in different cultures, it's been called many, many different things. Personally, I would say now it's beyond any name I could ever give it. Some of the ancients used to say, when you're thinking of spirit, God, source, it is that which cannot be described, or it's that which cannot be named. I oftentimes like thinking of it as a presence that's never an absence. If you're in a group like this, a metaphysical gathering, most likely you've already developed an intuitive sense within you that there is this thing, there is this presence, and it's inside of you, and you are developing an inkling, that it's in you. And, most of us have learned to start paying attention to this inner thing, this voice. You can call it many things. Most true spiritual practice, I would say things like meditation, affirmative prayer, chanting, journaling, and many other ways. Most of these spiritual practices bring you to a place where you have an intuitive knowing that you are part of it. Okay. Someone asked me the other night about what's the difference between a treatment and an affirmation. And well, I don't know that I gave an adequate answer. I could teach a class on that. But when you're doing an affirmative prayer, there's something that moves within you that touches you. It's a sense and it's a feeling where you develop a sense, you connect with spirit. There's a recognition and a realization. And as you're making your statement about what you're affirming, there's a movement in that process where you have a shift in consciousness. And when you do, and when you're complete with the thought, then you have done a treatment. And I could break it down more for you, but we get in touch with an awareness of that, is what I'm essentially trying to say today. Ernest Holmes, as I've said before, was a scholar and a writer who made it his life's work to study philosophy and the best religious thought of the time. I could give you his whole history, and I have and I will another time. His primary thing, though, is and was that there is power available to all of us. He used to say there's a bank account downtown with your name on it. Millions of dollars. So why aren't you using it? And all you have to really do is learn how it works, right? So his primary thing is that there's power available to all of us, and we can center ourselves in it and observe it, sense it and feel it, and know this power is here now. And he took it a step further, because I know many of you have prayed at different times in your life only to find your prayers unanswered. And I know some of the religious background that some of you have gone through would suggest, at least for me, my background would suggest that I was a sinner. And I knew the difference between my sins too, be they mortal or venial, and all of that. Whatever your background is, most likely you have had some. Holmes, though, Ernest Holmes said, we live, though, in a spiritual world, a spiritual universe. Okay, and he was really introducing the idea then of oneness. And he was canceling out the idea of duality, which circles back to my initial opening about evil. There's no place for evil in a spiritual universe, not as a force anyway. He never thought that we were isolated from God. It wouldn't be possible. Whatever power there is and whatever presence there is, it's not above you and it's not beyond you. It's certainly not some guy in the heavens punishing you in any way. The magnitude of this creative intelligence is not anything any of us can fathom, and it reaches out to infinity. We do our best to discover how it works. We observe it in nature. We learn to practice the presence. We see that as we lift our sights high and our consciousness high, our world opens up. We create avenues in mind by means of our consciousness. So Holmes said there's power for good in the universe, and we live in it. We breathe in it. And oh my goodness, we can awaken to the realization that we're part of it. Yes, you and I are part of an unimaginable spiritual system. We are, again, individualizations of it. We live, we move, and we have our being in it. So I walk in it, I talk in it, I think with it, it responds to me. And here's the really cool part. As an individual expression of it, we come to understand that life itself responds to us. It absolutely has to. That's the way it works. So as Ernest Holmes said and Louise has said, it's all very simple. There's power for good and you can use it. You have been using it for your entire life. Most weeks I talk about what we have learned as children. We have all grown up with families, different kind of families perhaps, but we've all been raised by people. We have developed belief systems as adults. It's an opportunity, it's a challenge. It's for us to challenge it because we're the next generation. People gave us a lot of information. A lot of it was very wonderful, and a lot of it perhaps would be very good for us to challenge it and change it, because we're supposed to be evolving in this lifetime. There's a lot of old ideas and beliefs that we cling to that no longer serve us. Our beliefs and our habituated thinking have been acted on over and over and over again. And it brings us our life. So your thoughts are very powerful things. You can change your thinking and then change your life. We don't have a belief in evil here, as I said before, but today I wanted to clear it up using a lesson or some thoughts from Ernest Holmes. He said there's no evil, at least not an objective force or an entity. And this past week, on every news show, I've been hearing everybody talk about evil. Okay, the evil in people, the evil in people who have shot people. And then I watched a clip where every single president, I think I went back to Kennedy or maybe Eisenhower, was addressing the country and talking about evil, which is why I thought I'd talk a little bit about it today from a religious science standpoint. The title of this lesson originally was Evil Disappears in the Light of the Truth. So I'm going to bring up a subject that any Science of Mind student is very familiar with as a subject. In fact, most of us have had to talk about it, think about it. And the subject is oneness. As you think about the idea of oneness, I will tell you I had to spend a whole year working with that one word in every single group and every single class. Because I was always talking about people doing things to me or other, and it was always about talking about what was happening, and I had a tendency to be focused on other people and events outside of me. So this teaching brings us back to the idea that there's one power, there's one energy, there's one life. And as we get into new thought, study, or teaching, and as we start to understand the idea of oneness and understand that we live in a spiritual system, one spiritual system, ideas of good and bad and who is good and bad and what is good and bad begin to loosen up a bit. They loosen up because we develop spiritual understanding. You know, the Indians used to say, don't judge what? Anyone unless you've what? Yeah, unless you've walked in their moccasins or whatever. So these absolute ideas of what's good and bad and who's good and bad and all of that it loosens up a little bit, because as you acquire spiritual knowledge, you're going to understand that all of life is unfolding. And even as you have changed and I have changed, and I must have done some really interesting things when I was younger. I know I did. I don't even want to think about them at the moment. But I've grown, and we grow, and everybody grows. We're not here to judge anyone. It might be good for us to acknowledge how we've grown and be grateful for the growth that we've had. I love Reverend Bill Tolliver, who used to say, everybody is on this planet together and we're all evoluting along. And it's a basic Christian principle as well. Love your brother as yourself. So ideas of good and bad and who is good and bad and what's good and bad and all of that, I think, begin to change a little bit, because we're beginning to understand that there's an underlying truth. We are learning to embrace oneness, this one power. I am not the totality of God. I am an individualization of God. When I see Jimmy or I see any of you in this room, I know that I'm dealing with spiritual beings in front of me, and I can say namaste because I see and know and understand the divinity that is in each and every one of you. We want to try to remember that in our daily living, because as soon as we start making people to be monsters and devils and everything else, who's got the problem then, right? Yeah, that reminds me of a very wonderful therapist about 20 years ago I spent some time with. And I was other referred, and I was always talking about what people were doing. And I was all bent out of shape. And she'd hand me a card every week. It had a teddy bear on one side, it was green, and the other side was the question, whose problem is it? And I thought, son of a gun, why does she keep giving me that same card week after week after week? Well, it's because the one who was out of joint was me. And so we come into this teaching and we understand that we live in a spiritual world, and everything is in fact perfect in the sense that it's God in action and it's unfolding. Even when we think, that it's a godless thing and everything's gone to hell, there is spiritual activity and unfoldment going on. It's very important to try to take that into your heart and into your mind. It's really what a true mystic or religious science practitioner will do. You will develop this sense of faith that there is God in this, and there is good in this, and it's really sometimes very hard to do it, I understand. But we have prayer and we have faith and we have this spiritual understanding. You might not believe in it. You might want to go towards evil, and you can. It's your prerogative. It's entirely up to you. But our practice is to understand that all of these events that are happening in life are here to bring us to a higher place of understanding. And regarding oneness, we come back to God is all that there is. We live in it, we move in it, we realize that God is all that there is. And so we do our best to embrace that and remember that. I remember another affirmation from an important book, at least along my journey, which was, I am not a victim of the world I see. I mean, that's a tough one for many people. You might have been in tough relationships, you might be in tough jobs, you might have had a lot of tough things happen in your life, but to become free, that was a very helpful affirmation. I am not a victim of the world. Or as you develop more spiritually, you can go to Don Miguel Ruiz's book, where you take nothing personally. If you can get to a point where you take nothing personally, then you're living in a world without blame. You're starting to create a world that's working for you. If I carry the message within myself, poor me, and ain't it awful, then life responds to that type of consciousness. So as we see ourselves more as victors rather than victims, as we step out of these places of thinking, we become empowered. As we embrace this teaching more and more, we understand that there is some cause and effect going on. It's always cause and effect. And that's an old phrase that informs us, to some extent, that we have brought many of the things into our own life experiences because of the way we have thought and the beliefs that we've had. And many of these more negative experiences can be released quickly if you begin to pay attention to what it is that's living inside of you in the way of your thinking. So, as I'm always asking you to pay attention to your inner dialogue, it doesn't matter so much where it came from. That isn't the important thing. Whether it was the distant past, or it might have been from your grandparents or their people before them, or it doesn't matter if it was your recent past. The thing to understand is that internal dialogue is the thing that brings forth your present circumstances and will be the thing that brings to you what's going to be happening next week and next month. So that essentially is my shorthand explanation for the law of cause and effect. For example, when you really give up the need to be a victim, when you really release it and you know that you're empowered and know you want to be empowered, then you won't see yourself anymore as disadvantaged. I used to say to myself, I refuse to be offended. I don't need to take on all of that. Terry Cole Whitaker, the title of her book was, I believe, "What you think of me is none of my business." It's just like, I don't, in all due respect, think it, but what we're after here is what Louise Hay was talking about in one of her affirmations. She said, self-acceptance and self-approval are the keys to everything. They're the keys to all positive changes. So if you can tune out all the noise, family, friends, opponents, and get right back to what Louise taught so well, self-acceptance and self-approval are the keys to all positive changes. When you can bring up your sense of self-esteem and loving yourself more, you'll become at peace. You don't need to justify your existence to anybody. You don't need to explain yourself. What you do need to understand is how wonderful you really are. And as you do this, you realize I'm not a victim of anything that's come before. And you could say, I release the need to think of myself in any bad way, right? I release the need to feel guilty. I release the need to be angry. I release the need to be resentful. I release all of this. And then as you do this, this weight that you've been carrying starts to lessen. Ernest Holmes called it corpses. The stuff that you drag around with you day by day by day, the remorse, the the wishing that something would have been different, resentments, anger, all of that. When we release the need to have any kind of tale of woe or ain't it awful, then you're releasing, and also release the need to have anybody feel sorry for you. When you do all of that, you're stepping into a much more empowered place of living. There is no good and there's no evil, as most people think of those two words. There is only the infinite, responding presence. So I'll say that again. There is no good or evil, as most people think of those words. There is only infinite, responding presence. There's only life responding to you. Now that's really exciting, I think. So if you can really understand that life is going to respond to you, then it's logical. What do you want to do? I want to upgrade my thinking so life responds to me in a better way. So there's a law that always works. It never fails. So logically, we're smart people. We start doing what? We start thinking what? bigger ideas, bigger thoughts. We hitch our wagons to stars. We stop shooting for the molehills, as they say. Focus on the great ideas and let yourself walk right to into those circles of experience. So I think it's exciting. I don't like repeating my old stories, but every minister I know does. And because there's always something that moved these people, and me too. There's about 5 or 6 things you'll oftentimes hear me refer to, and I believe it was in 1990. I met this woman who told me she was going to be my practitioner. Now, I never have seen that done before or since. I didn't even know what a practitioner was then, and she was funny, and I thought she was smart, and she was always talking to me about this word oneness. And she's always talking to me about taking everything back to principle. Now, Judith will know what that means, but a lot of people don't. I could do a talk or a lesson on oneness to fill a whole hour, and I could do another, and I will another Sunday, on the idea of taking everything back to principle. Because either of these ideas are the cornerstone of what we teach. But this lady, Mary, her name was Mary Curowitz, was totally preoccupied with those two things. And I think she was interested in me as a person because I was trying to figure it all out, how life worked. I've yet come to know that, I have come to know now that I am the cause to my own experience. And I think Mary helped me with that because at that time I thought I really thought I was guilty for many, many things. So this practitioner was wonderful, and she got me to start thinking of life in a different way. I was really a pretty good kid, and I used to, go to grade school, and I went to parochial school, and the nuns taught me I was a sinner. I acquired a lot of beliefs during those first 18 or 20 years. About the idea of being bad and all of that. I was taught I was a sinner in so many ways, and I had been confirmed. I had taken confession, gone to confession regularly, but it got to a point where I was questioning a lot of it. And I wound up in a unity church, and it was helpful because I could reframe a lot of the scriptures that I got from being a Catholic kid in a new thought way. Unity was pretty good at making all these interpretations out of things that made no sense to me. So that worked for a good while. I could hang on to some of the stories in the Gospels because they always had a new thought twist and would help me explain what I thought was the unexplainable. They had a dictionary that, in reference to the materials that could explain how someone could live for 300 years and all of that stuff. And I was gradually learning about this law again of cause and effect, and I was gradually understanding that the best kept secret of the age was always God in me. So that's what we teach you here too. The thing that you have in this teaching that most people don't have anywhere is you come into this teaching and you're reminded that this thing which has been kept from people throughout history is God is in you. And if you don't like to use the word God, call it whatever you want. This animating life is in you and it responds to you. It's been called the best kept secret of the ages. And if you're new on this call this morning, I'm going to say it for you the same way it was said to me back in the 1980s. There is a presence in you. It's always been there. There's a power in you. It's always been there, and it always will be there. You didn't do anything to create it, and you can't do anything to push it out of you. You can keep on messing up creatively. You can keep on ignoring it, but you have it. That which is sought throughout eternity is within you, operating through you. It's there. And whenever you invite it in, to the extent you partner up with it, invite Spirit in, it will respond to you. So circling back to this wonderful lady, Mary, who proclaimed herself to be my practitioner, which to this day amuses me because I've never seen it happen before. And her preoccupation with these two ideas. Oneness, one power, one life, one God, right? And for me not to take anything personally and to bring everything back to me, what I am creating, rather than what other people are doing. Once she got comfortable with me, or I got comfortable with her rather, and her humor, she said, Greg, I don't know how to tell you it except this one way. She said, you were living and you were taught to believe in a lesser idea of God. She said, you were taught about a God of love and a God of wrath. And she said, I know from what you've told me that you spent a lot of years in church, in prayer and praying for things and people and yourself, and you were always looking for forgiveness for your sins. And during those days, just about everything was a sin, I can promise you. So she said, you often wondered why God let all these bad things happen to you and to other people, and your prayers weren't answered. And then she said the one thing that stuck with me for over 30 years or so, and it was this. When you come into this teaching, she said, the universe so loves you that it responds to your every thought. It never misses a one. That's such an important idea. The universe so loves you. See, some of you think you live in a godless world and God doesn't answer your prayers. She was trying to say, the universe so loves you that it responds to your every thought. It doesn't miss a single one. This presence, this power is indwelling, so let us remember this law of cause and effect. If I keep on having a low opinion of myself, if I keep on allowing myself to stay in bad situations, and if I keep repeating erroneous thoughts and thinking, if I keep bringing my fears, my parents' fears and my grandparents' fears in, if I keep doing all this negative self-assessment, what do you think the law is going to do? It's just going to picture the same old, same old, same old, right? The universe is not trying to hurt anybody. Yet there's an awful lot of hurt in the universe. There's a lot of suffering. My God, turn on the television the past 2 weeks. It's enough to fill you up. It's just like it's troubling. So there's a lot of pain. Often at this point, you'll hear me say, I'll quote Ralph Waldo Emerson, where he will say, the finite alone has wrought and suffered, while the infinite lays back in smiling repose. God isn't out to get anybody. The universe responds to what we know. We might think we're a civilized society, but sometimes you question it. It looks like we're in the Stone Ages sometimes. But you can't change the entire world, but you can change you, and I can change me. And what we come here together is we come here to remember who we are. We're spiritual beings, and we have a lot of power. And as we really learn to love ourselves, we can have a great effect in the world. Not only do we lift ourselves up so we can experience joy, we can really authentically be helpful to others. We suffer plenty because we have so many attachments. That's a word for another class too. A whole class could be around that whole subject of attachments. Let me explain what I mean by that. We suffer because we want certain people to stay in our lives, and we want things to be a certain way, or we want to have certain outcomes to our desires or our prayers. We have lots of wants, and we want and we want and we want. First of all, we have to remember that we are individualizations of this God life. As we learn to meditate and commune with it, there always will be guidance. And as you learn to rely on this guidance, you'll be stepping up, and you'll be entering into worlds of experience that have otherwise been denied you because you've been caught up in I want what I want, what I want. The universe will speak to you, guide you, and I always say there's an internal guidance system. We all have one. And we know when we're off track. And really, don't look out there when you're off track. Look within yourself when you're off track, because look within, you'll get the answers you're looking for there. I know people come into these teachings thinking they can acquire great financial success, because we talk a bit about prosperity here, but that's really secondary to what we teach. People come in to these teachings because they think they can acquire great success, and I remember when the movie The Secret came, my God, the churches were flooded. I mean, the New Thought churches, because everyone wanted to demonstrate, all these riches and a windfall or a cure. And what we do here is we learn to work with the law. And as you learn to work with this law, we can definitely begin to improve our financial well-being, and we can better our health too. So what we teach here is not gimmicky in any way. It's not something for nothing, though. We don't get whatever we want whenever we want it. We're talking here always about a principle, and we're talking about a process, and we're learning to use it. So there's certain things we have to do ourselves in terms of our thoughts and our practice to bring forth the good that we want to experience. Said another way, God or Source cannot do for you what it can't do through you. That's such an important line. I don't know if people understand it. The universe cannot do for you what it cannot do through you. So I have to expand myself in some way. If I want to have a larger life, then I have to be more loving, be more giving. It comes through me. So I need to expand my consciousness. Louise would ask you, what are you approaching the ocean of life with? What are you carrying? Is it a thimble, or is it a glass, or is it some, because life gives you just as much as you can imagine and envision and believe. And all that it's really saying to you is, you cannot bring into your life something that's bigger or better unless you can have an internal acceptance of that thing that you're looking for. And let's face it, churches are closing from coast to coast in the United States, and they pretty much closed through all of Europe. And so we understand many of the younger people in particular don't like to use the word God anymore. I don't use it as much as I used to, because I know we're attempting to reach out to youth, and they're okay with some words. Some of the words have a lot of baggage. They bring forth ideas. I spoke this week about the 12 steps as a spiritual system, recovery program, which people use for every kind of thing, from relationships to addictions of every kind. And I like them because they solve in their language, they solve this whole notion of God with their third step. In the third step, they underlined and they emboldened the idea of turning your life over to this spirit, and they put as you understand it, always. They underline as you understand it. That was a big advance, because nobody's telling anybody what it is, where it is. And in the textbook, Ernest Holmes talks about the thing itself, what it does and how it works. The ancients used to say, again, it's that which cannot be described. There is no word that can adequately represent it for all of us. These days, we usually call it source or spirit. You can call it anything you want to. And I don't know for the rest of you, but over my lifetime, I've dropped most of the names, and certainly don't think of it as any kind of gender. From a New Thought perspective, or the perspective of a truth student, we always come back to the central idea that this source, or this God, if you prefer, is all that there is. That's the idea of oneness. This source, this God, is all that there is. As I look around this room and as I see your faces, I'm looking at individualizations of God. And that's what I have to remember. Anybody on this call, it's namaste, everybody, because there's a part of me that sees it in everybody I meet. That's right vision. If you're doing that way, oh my God, life starts to get exciting. When you're grounded in what the mystics always knew, that there is God, and that's all there is. When you get grounded in your understanding of New Thought, then there's a certain freedom, because you increasingly know that life is unfolding and always expanding everywhere and in everyone. Yes, life is evoluting along, and as I say most every week, there's much work to be done with our own selves. Louise didn't write a book on how to change or heal other people. She didn't write a book on how to cure the ills of society. We think over 100 million people have been exposed to her book or read her book, and the message was, you can heal your life. So there's definitely an inner focus. It's an inner journey. It's an inner focus. If you want to think about it as work, it's work. It's an application of this understanding. It's always going to be an internal process. It's never about changing anyone else. It's often been called a journey without a distance. So it's always going to be about you with you. The idea of evil has been around for a long time. I was studying it all day yesterday. I was trying to give you some history on it. And I think I first learned about it when I was a child. In the early stories of Adam and Eve, there was a serpent, and it was trying to tempt Adam and Eve, and eventually they were expelled from the garden. And then through history and art, we can observe there were a lot of beautiful angels above, and then there were the angels that were former angels, which were in hell. So there was forces for good then, and there was forces for evil. Sometimes I even listen to people talk about good energy and bad energy and making distinctions that don't really exist. For a religious scientist or for a real truth student, we always come back to this idea that this one place, there's a realization that we live in a spiritual world and that we have power at our disposal. I'll sum up with this. We can live in reaction, of course, to everything, and we can play out our old tapes that have been going on for years, that I'm a bad person, or I'm not good enough, or I don't deserve happiness or love. We can punish ourselves forever with this type of thinking, or we can ascend. We can let go of those thoughts, those moments. We can choose to let go of the past. We can choose to let go of the hurt. We can choose to let go of what people think about us and what they say about us, because, as I said before, it's none of our business. And we can choose to lift ourselves up in every conceivable way. As you do this, as you begin to live the affirmative life, life will open up for you, and you'll be amazed before you're halfway through. And as you do so in your own thought process, you'll be creating avenues in mind and consciousness so you can step into a world that's better than anything you've known before. So we need, in closing, to be approaching life with much bigger buckets. And so it is. Thank you.